And we're back for another session of Real Talk with me, Emma G. It is a very cold 91 degrees today. It is so hot outside. Oh my goodness. So I have been, stuck inside by choice, but for the most part, because I'm trying to escape the heat and not melt like the Wicked Witch from the West, as I've been writing and doing online shows. And now we're here, and I'm super pumped, as I always am, because every guest just seems to get better and better. Tonight, I am joined by the abominable, I can't even say that word. Incredible, fantastic, amazing, goddess of a human being.
I'm
so
abominable.
Yes, that's this is what happens when your emotions are like a million places and you don't drink coffee. So this is the cross I have to bear. But Maryann Lombardi, from the founder, the creator, the head human of the Human Capital newsletter, which started it started the end of last year, I believe. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be with you.
Yay!
Yeah.
I like happiness. It's my favorite emotion.
Yeah. I'm doing all right.
It's good. I'm glad. I'm glad. That is all we can ask at the moment, because things are a little bit kind of crazy. But for those who don't, despite my rather shitty introduction where I can't pronounce words properly because I'm so hype, do you want to sort of do a quick introduction of who you are and your background and what makes your heart happy?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. To avoid the usual sort of like credentials, I'll go this way. Like, I'm a friend, right?
Yay!
I'm a daughter. I am a mother of the coolest kid on the planet. I am an artist. I'm a writer, editor of the Human Capital newsletter, which is one of my latest projects, which I'm loving. I've been an entrepreneur most of my life in one shape or another, have had multiple small businesses. I've been an artist. I was a jazz singer for a long time in New York City. Along with that, I worked for city government, so I do government work, but in essence, I'm a problem solver. I usually get hired to do things that either solve a problem, fix something, build something, to tackle some challenge. So I've always been attracted to work that allows me to do that. I've always been at the center of arts and commerce in many ways, figuring out how those things come together. The business side of creative output and the power of that to build not only cities, but neighborhoods and environments and community and all of that. So how's that?
That was the best introduction, self-introduction I could have asked for. Thank you. That was beautiful. In New Zealand, we have like the indigenous culture is Maori, and the way in which Maori typically introduce themselves when they walk into a room is they start with their entire family tree. So it's like, this is the boat that my family traveled here on. This is the village that I reside by. This is the mountain that I live near. This is the ocean that swims, that flows past my house. This is, my grandparents were these people. This is like the church that we go to. This is, my parents' names are blah, and you can call me Emma. Like the very last minuscule, detail is what you can address me by.
That is really beautiful, and I wish that we would do more of that, because often, right, we lead with what we do,
right?
Which I'm not suggesting is invaluable. I think that we can take a lot of pride and a lot of power in what we do, but I come from a camp where I feel like what we do should not be who we are. It can be a component of who we are, and it can feed that in many ways, but we are of many things, And to your point of that story, I think I wish we were not only a little bit more in touch with what those ancestors are and being able to find them and channel them and be able to speak on them, but also be able to describe ourselves in different ways.
Yeah, it's interesting because, having grown up like that and having the complicated lineage that I have, it's been interesting living in America and being like, okay, so what are you? And I always have to respond with, I'm human. Like, where do you come from? I'm like, my mother's womb. Like, what do you What do you,
I came out of her vagina and I was here. Yeah.
Ta-da! When a mummy and a daddy love each other very much. No, it's maybe we can do a class on this or something, you know, have a look at our lineage. And I think a lot of people, especially in colonized America, don't know where they come from. So anyways, that's a conversation for another day. So I didn't know that you were a jazz singer.
Yeah, speaking of wombs, I came out of my mother's womb singing. So literally my entire childhood was singing in one form or another, or music, or any of that kind of things. And so I went to school as a performer. You know, I'd always been a singer. I went to New York City like everybody else does to do that. Learned very quickly that I wasn't as interested in the lifestyle of a performer, right? Like I found myself struggling with, I loved to sing and I loved to share and I loved to tell stories. But I found that everything that I needed to do that on some professional level didn't feed me in the way that I would look at my friends and it fed them. And I was like, damn, like what is wrong with me? Because I'm not being fed the way they are. And it took me a while to learn that I wanted to sing, but I didn't want to make that my career. I was much more attracted and ambitious as a businesswoman. And so I quickly made that kind of pivot and still sang in clubs as often as I could. But it wasn't necessarily about making the money doing it, because I was on the other side, like producing theater, and I had 2 companies in New York City, and we produced theater off Broadway and regional tours and all of that kind of stuff. And that was great. I loved that. Like fed the businesswoman in me. And then the other side could just go sing on, Restaurant Row or like some little club and have a grand old time,
That's awesome. That's awesome. So how did you make the shift from doing business and tour booking to moving to DC and working like through 202 Creates and a whole bunch of other governmental agencies that I'm sure you've dabbled in? What did that shift look like for you?
Yeah, so I think that so I did a decade in New York City doing all of that work, right? And maybe a year or two before I left, 9/11 happened. And for many people, that it was a moment to sort of do some reassessing. And I know for me at that time, I had to make a decision. If I was going to be a theater producer for the rest of my life, then I was going to have to go work for bigger fish. I was going to have to do different things, and I would have to make a commitment to that I just wasn't ready to make. And so I decided to take a break. I went back to grad school, and from there, everything else kind of changed, right? It trickled down. And then I just took whatever opportunity seemed interesting to me. I've always been a seeker of curiosity. And so, in my life and in my work, I have a tendency to go where the most interesting problem is that I can solve and play a role in. And so that's how I got into creative economy work, because it was hard, right? Like it was difficult to constituent build, to bring people together to solve a problem with like 18 different organizations who all have different needs and wants and are pissy about this or happy about that. And, and I loved that challenge, right? Like I loved that challenge. So I started that work in Massachusetts and had probably one of the most fun jobs I've ever had was working in Springfield, Massachusetts, doing economic development and program building and constituent building. And I mean, we created jobs, we built market rate housing, we moved, jobs downtown, we did program. It was a blast.
Springfield's an interesting place. I visited there a couple of times when I was working in the Berkshires. Didn't know that it was like the mecca of basketball. And there's a Dr. Seuss garden, which is cool. And apparently it's like a super dangerous place as well, but I loved it. I thought Springfield was great.
I loved it. I like complicated.
All I heard from your answer was basically like, I'm a superhero and I'm here to like solve everything.
I don't know. I like a good challenge, man.
That's awesome. So speaking of challenges, so you're doing the Human Capital newsletter and you're highlighting the voices of a whole bunch of dope people, which is amazing, because I feel like, when especially in the arts, there tends to be like a huge competition kind of mindset, whereas I feel like DC and in particular is one of those like co-opetition places, right, where artists really just support the crap out of each other, and you do a fantastic job of that. How did you come up with that idea, and how did COVID affect, like, because you started at the end of the last year, and then winter came, and winter's always kind of difficult when you're freezing, and then this pandemic happened, and now we're in political craziness. How are you showing up?
Yeah. So from a human capital perspective, like as an artist, I'm always looking for an outlet, right? Like, and I've always loved to write, but I never really I couldn't quite figure out what the outlet was for that writing. Mm-hmm. And I certainly still sing and play guitar and piano and all that. I do all the music stuff, but most of that is really supporting my kick-ass kid who's a songwriter and a singer and all that stuff. So I wanted to find an artistic outlet. And I wanted to challenge myself. And I felt like I talk to people nonstop, right? Like I meet people all over the world all the time who are doing really interesting things. And I wanted an opportunity to talk to them and capture that and share some of those people that were outside of the work that I do that is very DC centric. So, and then at the same point in time, I coach entrepreneurs, daily. That's a big piece of the kind of work that I do. And so there's a lot of thoughts and insights and tips and approaches that I have to that work that, again, I also wanted to find a place to put. And so out of that really developed what is human capital, which is really about uplifting the idea that really humans are the only capital that we can't do without, right? Like, certainly we need money and we need social capital and we need educational capital. We need all these other kinds of capital, but if you don't actually have the human, you can't get shit done, right? Like the human is the most important piece of that capital. And so, that's where human capital came from. And so, yes, I interview people and I talk about, thoughts and insights and kind of what's on my mind and go from there.
Right. That's cool. Have there been like any specifically like bizarre experiences that you've had with the human capital? Because I feel like when you run a media output, there's always bound to be at least one bizarre or kind of out of the box experience that you go through, right?
Yeah. So I don't know if I've had anything too crazy yet. I have had situations where I was really excited about an interview that just turned out terrible. And yeah, well, and I don't think it was the person, but there's been a lot of learning curve for me in this process, right? Because talking to people for a living doesn't necessarily translate to interviews in the same kind of way, right? Mm-hmm. Like some people enjoy that process and others don't. And so I think that I have learned a lot about how you put together something like this, a newsletter, what's really involved. I have an enormous amount of respect now for people who have been doing this really successfully before, because I had no idea, right? Like I knew theoretically how all this stuff works, but it's really great to get, your hands dirty and actually start doing the work, right? So that's been awesome, And I think to your point about how, and we can just touch with COVID first because there's layers of what's been happening. But I think what was interesting originally and how with COVID was I wasn't aware of how much I rely on external sources for creativity. And so it was really interesting to me to get locked in my house and then find that I was struggling with just creatively, right? Like ideas, and it just was much harder than it was previous to that. Mm-hmm. And that it made me think a lot about kind of like how we source our creativity, like how much of that is internal, how much of that it comes from inside you, and how much are we relying on our external sources to feed that. Right. And that's been really interesting to sort of explore.
How are you overcoming that then?
I'm sorry.
No,
I was going to say something sassy, but again, I've already.
You can be sassy. Do your thing, girl.
No, I was just going to say buy better wine, but
But, I hear the matua is a New Zealand wine. It's on sale at the moment. Do your thing.
Nice. Well, I think that's a great question. I don't completely have the answer, aside from the fact that I've been trying new things, right? Like, and one of the things I've done is I've asked everybody, right? Like I've asked like everybody I know. I mean, I asked you once, right? It's like, what do you do with like creativity block, right? Like, what are you? How do you unblock that if you are finding that? And it's better now, right? Like I think part of it was just the shift, but it's been interesting to explore.
Yeah. I feel like, when there are two main camps, I think, where when things are so overwhelming that you just can't write, or there's nothing going on and you can't write. So the happy medium of like, okay, do I need to meditate more? Do I need to like just run around and just yell positive things to the world and hope that somebody responds back with something so that I can write about it, which is generally my go-to at the moment because I'm still in self-quarantine. So you're still exploring things. That's cool. Has there been any particular sort of instance that you have found kind of just fell into place?
Well, I think the one thing that I'm getting more comfortable with is like I think the voice is something that matters, right? Like what your voice is, and also the role your personal experience and your personal feelings plays in it. And I've spent a very long time as working where my job is to reflect others' needs, right? Like my job is to be in service of others. And I do, that's where I am most comfortable. I am most comfortable in figuring out how I can help other people get where they need to go, and also make sure that they know that they matter, because that's sort of one of my like core needs, right? Like I just need, people to know that they matter no matter who they are. It doesn't matter. It's not because of what you do, or it's just because you exist, you matter. So this process has been a really good experience for me to have to be a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more honest, and I think that journey has been an interesting one, and that gets a little easier depending on what I'm talking about. But I find myself figuring out, okay, like, is that something I can share? How comfortable do I feel? Like, well, maybe I'm going to wait on that one and I'll come back to it, right? Like just that comfort level has been an interesting thing.
Vulnerability is like one of my top
superpowers. It's a superpower.
I know that because I don't know, I think, having been born with health complications and having to rely so heavily on medical stuff, and then my mom, and then, I always wanted to be a musician. So I started busking at the age of 9 or something ridiculous. For anybody who's watching, busking, you should know by now, Mean Street Performance, but whatever. So like how, and then now that I'm an adult and I'm reading about Brené Brown and I'm reading about Amanda Palmer and all these other super badass people who are leaning into vulnerability. And, I don't know if you've caught one of the past Real Talk sessions I did with A Call to Men, which is really a movement focusing on empowering men to be vulnerable and allow that to drive them, as opposed to always leaning on anger and violence. But I feel like, vulnerability is one of those things that we don't talk about enough. And as a result, we kind of don't always have that roadmap to figure out, what does that look like for us? What did that look like for you as maybe you're still going through it. What does it look like for you as you're trying to figure out what vulnerability is and what kind of role it plays for you?
Yeah, well, one of the things I think is that like many things, vulnerability is one of those things that needs to be modeled, right? Modeling matters, right? Representation matters, modeling matters. What you see out in the world and what you experience and what you absorb has a huge impact on what you think is okay and what you can do. So I think for me growing up, there wasn't an enormous amount of modeling of vulnerability in my family. And so that was so it took me figuring that out on my own, for my own comfort level for that, and I think that's a constant journey, for me, right? Like, and I think it should be. I don't think it's something that is ever finished. I don't think it is something that I don't ever want to be finished, right? Like that's just not my goal, right? My goal is not to know it all. My goal is not to have found it, or find myself. Like I'm not somebody who believes in the whole I'm going to go find myself thing. No, we're all on a journey, right? We're all on a journey, and we may get more comfortable with things as we grow and we age and we experience and we go through life. But if I ever say I found myself or I'm done, somebody slap me, because I just think that I want to stay curious. I want to stay, trying to figure that out. So, I mean, I think I'm doing a much better job from a vulnerability standpoint, but it's a journey.
I feel you. I feel like in fact, I dated a guy for a hot minute back in New Zealand who literally told me his biggest fault was that he was complacent. And I was like, okay, we good. See you later. Don't call me, I'll call you. I'm just going to keep pushing. I'm going to be over here. That's a great answer. I love that. You mentioned earlier in the conversation that while you were working in New York as a musician, it wasn't feeding you. And I took that to mean it wasn't feeding your soul, or it wasn't feeding your inner light as such. How did you come to realize that? Because I feel like a lot of people don't do what feeds them, right? And I think that's a huge issue here in DC, for example. People do a lot of things because of the money, not necessarily because it lights their fire. How did you come to a place where you found what lit your fire, but also that you were comfortable to lean into that and actually allow yourself to explore that direction further?
Yeah, well, I think a couple ways. So by my nature, as you know, is I am wicked impatient, and I will err on the side of doing than err on the side of thinking. And so I
think this is why we get along.
And so I think as a young person, when I moved to New York, I didn't exactly know how to get a job as a singer, right? Like I didn't know how I was going to start getting paid to do that, but I did know how to build shit. So like I would go to auditions and I would do that, and it was just slow, right? Like that process was slow. And so to kind of keep myself inspired, and because auditioning, right, especially in the theater space, right, you have to get comfortable with no, right? Like your job is to hear no. That's your job. And at some point in time, you get cast and you get hired and you go do something, right? But it is really a balance of that waiting game and then doing other things while you're waiting. Like it's just this kind of balance. So my choice of the doing other things was to start producing shit. And so as I started to produce things, I'd produce things for myself to be in, but then I found that it was too distracting. And so I'd start producing things for my friends to be in, and that was more fun. And then I'd start producing things for other people to be. And the next thing you know, I was inspired by that challenge. And it also helped that I had a knack for raising money. And so with that, it just kind of started to spiral. But it really started from that impatience that I had in trying to figure out, like, I can't sit and wait because I don't know how to wait. And every once in a while, I wonder what would have happened if I was if I could wait. Because it wasn't that I didn't love it. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying that, like the experience of being on stage and that kind of thing, even though I did like the sort of cabaret scene much better than the traditional musical theater scene.
Nice.
But I do wonder, right? Like everybody takes these turns in life, right? And, and I wonder what would have happened if I wasn't so impatient. I don't regret it because I love my life, but it is one of those sort of fascinating things, being like, if you weren't so impatient, what would have happened?
I think, I don't know, running through that movie, Sliding Doors.
I love that movie. I tried to option that movie back in the 90s. Option it to make a musical out of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That would have been cool.
Projects I wanted to do with my company.
I feel like we should totally do that. Bring it back. 30 years later. Why not? No, I hear you completely, because I'm also somebody who is not good at waiting for things. But I think, I don't know, it'd be nice to meet your alter ego one day and be like, oh, hi, patient person. And next minute, I feel like if that was me, I'd probably still be living in New Zealand and probably knocked up with a ring on my finger by now. But we good.
Another life.
So with the whole impatient thing that you're talking about, is that kind of what spurred human capital to become the thing that has become?
I don't know if impatience, I think that it was more about the challenge of it, right? Like there was something very attractive to me to tell myself, you have to write 52 issues. You have to write 52 issues of this thing, go do it. Right. Because I have a little bit of like push you off the edge and see what happens.
Right.
That's a little part of that impatience too. It's sort of like just a little impulsive in that way, and like try the hardest thing first.
Right.
And often if I think too much about it, I can talk myself out of almost anything. And so I tend to want to sort of get the basics and then just do it, and so I was interested in the challenge of it. And I just desperately needed an artistic outlet.
Right. Right. That's cool. I really, I like that.
So everybody subscribe. Everybody who is sort of here listening to this whole thing, like humans, just go to MaryannLombardi.com. Subscribe. Anyway.
Good. I like it. I'm putting that in the comments for you. Okay. Right now. There we go. Awesome. And Gifford's just joined as well, so that's exciting. Cool. So on Friday, quarantine was kind of lifted in DC. It's been a bit weird in different places, and Florida has been very different to North Carolina, to California, to Virginia, to Maryland, to DC. But a couple of nights, like over the last few nights, curfew has been brought in and then lifted and then brought in and then lifted. I believe that DC, the curfew has now gone from 7 p.m. up to 11 p.m. I don't know if you live in DC or where you are, but you do. Okay. How is that affecting your productivity and your output and your overall sense of well-being, I guess?
Yeah, so the curfew in and of itself isn't really affecting anything, but sort of there is a compounded sense of pain, loss, unrest, anger. Like there's all these complicated emotions that not only were complicated, 2 weeks ago, but it's just like compounding, right? Like all of it is compounding for all of us in a variety of ways. And I think that it is easy to feel like overwhelmed by all that has happened. And it's amazing to me that you can almost forget about COVID due to the past week. Right? Like, I mean, it takes a lot to steal that moment from a pandemic, but it's just it's just a lot, right? Like, and I think that as humans, it's hard to cope with all of that, right? Like, I mean, and figuring out your own way of being able to manage that kind of complicated emotional environment is just rough. And so I've been trying to not only navigate that for myself, but be there for my friends who are having different relationships with what's going on, and engaging it in a different way than I might be, and then let alone being a parent of a kid who is has anxiety in one sense, but also really wants to do something, and is, of a generation that doesn't quite understand like how we all fucked everything up, right? Like, and is a teenager, so of course loves to tell us how we fucked everything up. So, it's just been it's a lot for everybody, not just me, right? Like I'm just one small piece of this, but I think that, I've just been trying to be kind to myself and reach out to everybody I can think to reach out to. Right. Like, I've just been sending a lot of like random texts and phone calls to people like, are you there? How are you? Are you okay? I just want you to know I was thinking about you, because I don't have anything brilliant to say, but I just want to know you're okay. You know.
For real.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I don't have children, but you know, it's really interesting seeing the different perspectives of different generations to this. You know, I live on a neighborhood of predominantly Black people and of different generations, and having a conversation with my elderly neighbor is very different to the conversation I'm having with, you know, the younger humans, even younger than myself, around how they're feeling. I saw some of the, back to your point about the pandemic versus the political climate. You know, there have been protests in DC for the last several days, and it seems as if, like, while everybody's wearing masks, there is certainly no social distancing or physical distancing happening. How are you feeling about that? Are you concerned for the safety of the city? Are you concerned with the safety of yourself, of your child?
I'm not concerned for the safety of myself. I think that, yes, I'm concerned for the safety of the city, right? Like, I think it'll, and we're really not gonna know the impact of this for another couple of weeks, right? Because it takes some time to, you know, people need to get tested or what, right? So I'm absolutely concerned for the people who have been in, you know, public gatherings, right? Like, I'm concerned for their safety, but I understand exactly why they're doing what they're doing. And so I think people are making they're making a choice that matters to them. That's really important. I am not concerned for my child, because my child will barely leave the house. So, okay. But I am so proud of my kid, who for the past 2 months has only left the house to move between her father and my home, but who sent a text at like 11 o'clock last night saying, I have to do something. Can I print this up and like get out of the house and put it on, you know, the neighbors' cars and in their mailboxes. And it's a whole thing about how to help, how people can respond and participate and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, like, that is so great. Like, this is this kid who for the past 2 months has been stuck in the house. And this is a moment that they're saying, I have to get over my fear
That's
of
awesome.
virus to get out and I can't do everything, but I can do something, right? Like, and I think that's a great example of the idea that, you know, one person can't do everything. And I think we fall into a trap of feeling like we have to solve it, right? And like, no one person can solve it, but everybody doing a thing, whatever you're comfortable doing, has an impact, right? Like, it just has an impact.
Yeah. No,
don't get me started on the voting, but like,
please vote, guys. Please make sure you vote. No, that's 100% right. And I think, I mean, that's been something that I've been personally grappling with for the last, 5 days. It's like, I want to get out there and protest, but at the same time, I can't risk being in a crowd of thousands of people when you're all, squashed in like sardines. What can we do? We can donate to causes that are actively, involved with this. We can, buy Black businesses, or purchase from Black businesses and support Black businesses. There's a whole bunch of resources out there that have been really, really beneficial. Do you feel that that there are things that people could be doing more of, or do you feel that people are relatively aware of how they can get involved?
Yeah, no, I don't think people are aware of how they can get involved, but I am not an expert at all the ways people can get involved, but I think there's a lot of really good resources online to find the way that works for you. I do think that most people feel very overwhelmed, right? They feel like they don't know how to be involved because they feel like they need to protest, but they don't want to protest, or they don't, like, that's not their jam, and they don't know what the alternative is, right? And so I think that there are some good, and I could send these to you afterward, but there are some good sort of resources that help you kind of look at all the different kinds of things that you could do, you know,
Right.
and some of the things that you mentioned are enormously valuable, right? Like, I mean, supporting your Black businesses, having conversations like these matter, right?
Yeah.
With people who may not all agree on everything. You know, I think that's another thing that matters tremendously, is being able to have
Definitely.
conversations with people who are not in the choir. So, but I also think, you know, as an artist, you have such an amazing opportunity to use that gift that artists have to do something, right? Like,
Yeah.
the act of creating is an act of protest in many ways, right? It is an act of it's a gift of that, and it can be used in so many ways. And so I think from an artist perspective, there is so much that can be done just in the act of creating.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm looking back at all the songs that I've been recording and releasing over the last, 3 years even that I've been living here in DC, and I'm going, that's come to bite me back in the ass. Like, superhero, didn't think we would actually need it this much, right? Time's up for the bad stuff. Here we are. But to that same token, I think a lot of artists are kind of feeling like, but this is what we do. This is like, I'm not doing anything different. I'm still creating and being the same artist that I was 5 months ago, so I think there's a huge.
But could you be collaborating with somebody different?
Oh, we are. Yeah.
And I don't mean like you, I know you are, but I mean, like from an art perspective, I think
right.
that yes, you're still creating, but how, but where could that creation happen? Right? Who could that creation happen with? Where could it be amplified? How in a time right now where we are more connected than ever out of necessity, how can you use the digital tools that we have to be collaborating with people in New Zealand, to collaborate with, because everybody is protesting right now, like everybody is feeling something, right? And so where can your skills as an artist be expanded in a way that connects so many more people?
Yeah.
So I think yes, it is what you're doing. You're already creating, but there's so many more people who could be involved in that.
Strategize better. Strategize. Stop, collaborate, and listen. Something like that.
Now, collaborate.
Yeah. I love it. And again, that's that whole co-opetition thing we were talking about earlier. So how have besides, your child, overcoming epic proportions of anxiety and doing something active and productive, round of applause. That's awesome. How else have recent events, impacted your own work, family, and career?
Yeah, so we've talked about how it's affected my immediate family. Well, it's made my mother text me 8 times a day. But which she does already. So now but now her texts are really like, are you home? Are you locked in your house? I'm like, oh my God, Mom. Fine.
Good to know that doesn't stop.
Does not stop. You could still be my age, and your mother could still be texting you because she's afraid that, like, the worst will happen.
Oh, goodness.
Work-wise, it hasn't affected necessarily the functionality of my work, aside from the fact that it has shaped how I'm thinking about things, right? Like, right. It's shaping my approach to stuff, and my work from a government perspective. It has a very it's very poignant to that, because there are people who are involved and engaged, and so in that kind of sense, it's a very real thing. But when it comes to the human capital work, it's mainly just made me think about things in a different way, right? Like, and approach the topics that we talk. I mean, this week I'm doing this whole thing on coping, right? Like, right. And sort of out of the box ways of coping, because we all know the sort of like 3 ways to cope clickbait that everybody knows, but you know, being the sassy person I am, I have like, you know, a bunch of sort of more sassy things of ways of coping. But
can you give me 3 sassy ways of coping, because I want to respond with my ideas.
Well, I mean, what I do too, one of them is all about music, right? Like, but it's not just about music, but it's about like singing out loud, right? Like stand on your front porch and like belt the fucker out, right? Like, because there's a thing about music and about singing. And I think people forget that singing is not about being a good or bad at it. You don't need to do or know anything to sing, right? Like your body is made up of rhythm and sound. Like you are an instrument, whether you consider yourself a singer or not, right? And so the physical act of expressing sound, right, is natural to everybody, you know. And we all should just like crank up whatever song gets us going and like sing our lungs out. And I can't tell you how therapeutic that is, right? Like that is very cheap therapy. You know, it is good for your body, mind, and soul to do that.
1000%.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool. I was going to say punch things, but sorry.
I talk to my cat, right?
Okay.
Like I mean, we're talking to your pet, right?
Not gonna lie, when coronavirus hit, I got a cat purely for that purpose.
Good for you. I support that decision.
She's basically my lifeline. I'm not gonna lie, she's great. Yeah, no, I totally agree. So how are you managing, besides cuddling your cat, how are you managing to stay positive and active and inspired during this time?
Talking to people like you helps. So I think that it depends what kind of active you're talking about. I have to say that like my fitness routine has been terrible. And I am actually quite annoyed when I do my morning walks around the block and I see the woman who lives across the street. Like she does these massive workouts at like 6 a.m. on the thing, and I just watch her. I'm like, God, if I could be you. I'm just like, I want to be you so bad, but I'm all right with it. It's just not happening. So I wish I had the motivation of the woman who lives across the street from me, but I don't. But from an inspiration perspective, like, and this sounds cheesy, but it's just absolutely true, is that, so I jam with my kid a lot, you know, and I play guitar, I play piano, we sing, we just jam a bit. And like, I can't tell you, and it's always fun, but there's something about what we've been doing lately, which it just like feeds my soul in ways I can't even tell you. So like, you know, that's been awesome.
That's awesome. I guess, are you like jamming new songs, old songs, covers?
Everything. We'll do, we'll pick songs that they like or I like, and we'll figure them out, and we'll figure out duets and harmonies and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes we just make shit up, right? Like we'll just do, you know, I'll scat something and they'll do, you know, we'll just do sort of like a back and forth of that. And, you know, we just make stuff up. So it's awesome.
I love it. I'm sorry, I crack up laughing when you say scat, because scatting is obviously a musical term for, you know, like making improvisation, either vocally or.
Also, doesn't it mean?
But well, I used to work, like my first ever job working in America was working as an outdoor education teacher, and whenever I said scat, people automatically thought I was talking about animal droppings. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Awkward when you're teaching a whole bunch of like 5th graders. I'm just saying.
Poop's funny at any age, though. It just is.
This is true. You were talking about something that triggered an idea for me before, but I've completely lost it. Nonetheless. No. Okay. So when it comes to you know, like making sure that your health and things are being catered for at the moment, is there anything that you like that you wish you could be doing, or that you are feeling like that you're getting involved with your kid in doing to help maintain that physical exercise beyond envy of your neighbor?
Yeah, well, I mean, I walk a ton, I bike a ton, like I'm doing as much of those kind of things that I can do,
Mhm.
and that helps. Also, like one of the things that I've discovered is that so many now that I'm on Zoom calls all the time, I'm sitting on my
Mhm.
butt all the time, and
Mhm.
so I'm actually like I've started rationing my video conferences to phone calls because I can walk while I talk on the phone. So
Yeah.
and that's something that has been helpful because it doesn't keep me locked at a desk.
Mhm.
Well, my kitchen table, let's be real, is my desk now, working from home. But that's nice. It's a small thing, but it does make a difference from a physical activity perspective,
Totally.
also
Totally.
inspiration perspective. Like I can't sit still. Like if I'm sitting in one space all day, whether it's an office, whether it's my house, it doesn't matter. Like that's just not what keeps me active and inspired. So I have to move around. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, and so simple things like that have helped from a
That's
physical
cool.
activity perspective.
That's cool. So, I mean, I remember when this whole COVID-19 broke out in the first place, and we were having to, buzzword, pivot. I'm going to start a drinking game, I swear to goodness. Every time someone says entrepreneur or pivot over the next few months, I'm going to just drink. Might not be alcoholic, but I'm going to drink. But as we've all pivoted to these at-home businesses and making sure that we are still maintaining our workflow from our office to our home office, people have been saying like the new normal is going to be working from home. We're no longer going to have to rent office space and go into town and, spend hours in traffic to get to and from work. Do you think that that is an actuality? Do you think that's healthy? Do you think that's um, like a possibility for how life is going to look post COVID?
Well, I do think there is some truth to some of that. I'm not on the extreme of one or the other. I think and I hope that some of this work, the working from home and all of that kind of stuff stays, right? Like I do think that there are some businesses that can do it and do it well and can excel at that. And I think that there's a lot of things that were sort of waiting, right? Like you think about telework as one of them, telehealth is one of them, all of this sort of delivery options for things, all of that stuff was possible before, but there was no motivator to do it.
Yeah.
There's no motivator for people to really like jump in full force in that. Like telehealth, I feel like is one of the best examples of this because, telehealth has been around since, and I'm no expert, but I think it's been around since like the 80s or something like that. But very few people were taking advantage of it. And there was a lot of pushback around using it, but it's essential. It's been essential and it is so valuable. Right? Like it saves time. It provides an opportunity for doctors and patients to get to know each other a little better, to humanize the doctor-patient relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It allows more people access to therapy services that ever had access to that kind of stuff before. So like there's a lot of wonderful things about telehealth that would not have been possible without the situation that we're in. And I hope that stays. And I think that the people who are on the fence about telework because they felt like their employees would not be effective and would just slack off and watch movies the whole time, they've had to figure out how to get it done. And the hope is that they will, whether it's Twitter, who obviously has already said that they will, but the hope is that they will allow that to continue. Because it can be, I mean, I've been more efficient, like to be honest with you, like I feel like working from home has made me enormously more efficient. Like it just has. And partly it's because people aren't coming in and out of the office. I mean, you've been there, like everybody's coming in and talking and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
it has focused things and it has made me have to organize and structure in a way that has made me more efficient.
That makes sense. I feel like, there are very few people, there are two main camps, right? Like the super efficient at home and the super like, I get distracted all the time because Facebook is a thing and Twitter is a thing. And not me personally, although I do get distracted relatively frequently. That's cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your feedback. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss before we bid the humans of the social media platforms farewell? What?
No, I feel good. I appreciate you taking the time and having me on, and I always love to talk to you, so it's all good.
Likewise, and for anybody who is listening in and is interested in keeping it in touch with Maryann, but also keeping in touch with the enormous variety of humans that she is constantly highlighting in her using her platform of the human capital, please head to Maryann Lombardi, which is MaryanLombardi.com. And I'm the reason why I'm so good at spelling that is because I hate having my last name misspelt, which is why I'm MG, guys. Fun fact. It's a doozy. It's a doozy. So thank you so much for your time and your love and your ray of sunshine that you bring to every community that you connect with, and your constant drive for positive change. It's inspiring. So thank you for being here and taking the time with me. For everybody else, be good, be kind, spread love like it's going out of fashion, be your own kind of superhero. And of course, as always, please, for the love of cheese, don't forget to call your mum.